Hello, my friends. I'm State Representative Tom Calter, and I welcome you to another episode of Issues of the Day. This is a program where we attack issues that are on the forefront in our newspapers, in our communities, and on top of mind. We take on issues that are fact-based. We take on issues where people want to know the data. They want the information so that they can draw their own conclusions. I don't bring issues to you that are politically driven. I won't have necessarily a strong opinion either way. The objective of this program is to give you information so that you can make informed decisions. Today, I'm really pleased to have with you old friend Mark Sylvia, who was our town manager in Plymouth. Hey, Mark.
Hi. Nice to see you.
Great to see you again.
Glad to be here.
You know, Mark recently was promoted again for the second time in 6 years in state government. Mark started as after he left us here in Plymouth, in very good hands, I may add. That's a sign of a great manager, Mark.
Good team. Good team.
And Mark started as the director of Green Communities, which is a program in Massachusetts that he'll tell us more about, that has been the prime mover, the main driver behind so many of our communities finding more energy efficient ways of operating. And then was quickly promoted to Commissioner of Energy, and did a remarkable job there in a capacity that I was privileged to work with Mark very closely from the legislative perspective. And then just recently has been promoted to Undersecretary of Energy. Quite a trajectory, Mark.
Yeah, it's been a great experience working in this administration and on these very important issues.
Well, it's my privilege to refer to you as Mr. Secretary.
Well, thank you very much, Representative.
Well, Mark, years ago, when you first joined the administration, the governor set out an ambitious schedule to bring online 250 megawatts of solar power by the year 2017. Now, we've already met and surpassed that in 2014, which is a pretty proud accomplishment for the Commonwealth.
Indeed.
Where do we go from here then? What, you know, when you finish high school a year early, what, you know, do you necessarily go off to college, or what do you do, and what do we do from here?
Yeah, so thank you for that whole introduction, and it's a real pleasure to be here with you. We've worked so well together over the years, and so I'm pleased to still be able to work with you in your capacity as representative. You're right, the governor set a goal when he first came into office. There were only 3 megawatts of solar installed in Massachusetts when Governor Patrick came into office.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, and he said, you know, we are at the end of the energy pipeline. We have no indigenous fuel sources other than the wind that blows and the sun that shines. We need to focus on ways to reduce costs and bring homegrown energy to our residents. And that's what solar does. And so he said, one way we're going to do that is we're going to set ambitious goals. So he set the goal of 250 megawatts by 2017. But he also worked with you and other members of the legislature to pass the Green Communities Act, which created all kinds of tools for businesses, for residents, for municipalities. And so in 2013, because of the policies that came out of the Green Communities Act and the vision that was shared by many, we surpassed that 250 megawatt goal 4 years early. And so the governor said, okay, this is very important for us to take a bow, but we need to keep moving. And so within a week of announcing that we met that goal, he set a new goal of 1,600 megawatts by the year 2020. And just to put it in perspective, today, as of today, there are 615 megawatts of solar installed from Cape Cod to the Berkshires in all but one municipality. 350 of the 351 cities and towns have some kind of solar.
And how many megawatts would you estimate are in queue?
Well, there are several hundred megawatts that are in queue now. We have a very robust program, a Solar Renewable Energy Certificate Program, SREC 2, which was a build off of the original program that really helped boost the amount of solar. So we really see a very clear pathway for us to meet the governor's new goal of 1,600 megawatts. And it's not just generating clean renewable power. And in your district, in Kingston and in Plymouth, the municipalities as well as residents and businesses are taking advantage. You know, the Plymouth Public Schools has, I believe it's 8 megawatts of solar PV that they're utilizing for the schools to help reduce costs to taxpayers. Kingston as well is installing solar PV. So there's a lot happening at the local level. And I think one of the important things that the governor has talked about is good clean energy really has three very important purposes. It helps stimulate the economy, it helps to reduce costs, and it helps to clean up our environment. Those are not mutually exclusive of each other when you're talking about clean energy. They're actually working in tandem with each other.
Let's talk about reduced costs for a minute.
Sure.
Because I think this is a paradigm that we should talk about more often.
Sure.
If we look at the history of technology in so many fields, whether it's building airplanes, whether it's building cars, calculators, computers, the startup costs for those new innovations were outrageously expensive.
Absolutely.
And people wondered about the sustainability of that technology and technological advancement because of the cost.
Right.
As time went on, costs began to drop. If you recall, maybe you may not, you're a bit younger than me, but if you recall the big calculators that we bought when the calculators first came out, may have been $150. Today you'd buy them for $15. I think if you could speak for a few minutes
Sure.
about how government has worked with industry to try and defray some of the costs of solar development, and I think appropriately so, because that's the only way that we can get this type of clean technology online, with an understanding that over time it will become more cost effective. The market will mature, the costs will come down, ratepayers will benefit. I think we all understand the need to replace fossil fuels with clean energy. We all understand that it creates good jobs, and that's why so many people are supportive of what we're doing. The people who are skeptics talk about it being not cost effective. So speak to that if you wouldn't mind.
I'm glad you raised that point, because that always seems to be one of the arguments that is made for not focusing or investing in innovation, which is something that has built this nation from the beginning. And in the energy front, there's been a lot of innovation, certainly over the last numerous decades, but the focus had always been more so on fossil fuels. As you said, the fossil fuel industry has and continues to receive significant subsidy from the federal government. But the importance of looking at alternative technologies is something that more and more states are starting to focus on, and the federal government is as well. And so take, for example, solar, as we've been talking about. A short 6 or 7 years ago, the total installed cost for solar PV. So that's everything from the actual panels, the equipment, and then the soft costs. Permitting, installation by installers, all of that was roughly around 9 cents a watt. It's now dropped to 4 cents a watt.
No kidding.
Or I should say that more accurately, from $9 a watt to $4 a watt. And the reason why that's happened is for a number of reasons. Number one, the cost of the technology is coming down. Soft costs. We've all focused on trying to drive down soft costs, trying to find ways to expedite or streamline permitting. As projects start to get installed, there's more of a familiarity on the installer side. You have more businesses that are coming into town that are finding easier ways to streamline the process so that the consumer is benefiting at the end. So there are a whole host of reasons that the market has enabled it. But even as state officials, when we look at different types of technologies, solar PV had been one of those higher cost technologies, and we made a very specific decision through the Green Communities Act, which allowed us to provide a slightly higher incentive in the short term for solar, so that in the long term, that helps to drive costs down, which is what we're seeing. So the incentives that we've invested have helped to drive and create a market, where the market itself has found ways to do things better, more efficiently, and that helps to drive down costs at the end of the day. And to put a fine point on it for you, on the kind of jobs piece, because that's a big part of the efficiency of all of this. Massachusetts has some 80,000 people working in the clean energy space. The second biggest sector in that space is solar PV. We've seen companies that are either homegrown companies. I think of Beaumont Solar in New Bedford, which was a sign company that has converted its business model from a sign company that had a lot of the equipment to get onto roofs, but now they've redirected their efforts and have developed a robust solar company. Solar City, which is a company that came from outside of Massachusetts, recently opened up their second building in Pembroke, not far from here.
Right.
So Marlborough and Pembroke. And so what that tells us is we're providing the right incentive to help ultimately drive down costs and make it more affordable for residents and businesses. And as a result, that's driving more job creation. All of that has really led to what we see as a real robust market, one that we're ranked 4th nationally in 2013 for the most solar deployed in a year, 2nd in commercial installations. Now, you compare us to California or Arizona or North Carolina, which have sunnier climates and they're much bigger, and yet Massachusetts always ranks within the top 5, which is a pretty impressive acknowledgement of the effort in Massachusetts.
Is there anything going on, Mark, in terms of stimulating the public sector side? For instance, the Massachusetts School Building Authority
Sure.
Are building these model schools. We've got one right now in North Plymouth. A very exciting project, a great place for our kids to go to school. As you know, the MSBA specs into their model program everything they want and need and demand in that school, from carpet to ceiling tiles to paint to furniture and everything else. Has there been any discussion with the Department of Energy and the MSBA about speccing in solar in all of our new schools?
So, I'm glad you raised that, because I think there are a number of opportunities now, and we have had a number of conversations between MSBA and the Department of Energy Resources on ways that we can continue to work together to ensure that model schools are built both in the most energy efficient way possible. So you want to reduce your demand to the lowest amount possible, and then with the energy you do consume, can you do that with renewable energy? And the MSBA has done some work with their green repair program to help identify ways to either retrofit or convert systems to more efficient systems. We have the Mass Save program that school districts avail themselves of, either in new construction or in retrofits. And the Green Communities Division has been working closely with the MSBA, certainly in promoting what's available through the Green Communities Initiative. So cities and towns, whether you're a designated green community or not, so a good example is Kingston and Plymouth. Kingston's a designated green community, Plymouth isn't, but Plymouth has taken advantage of a number of programs and support through Green Communities to help them to do the amount of solar PV that they've done for the Plymouth Public School District. So there has been a lot of partnership between MSBA and other state agencies, along with Green Communities and DOER. But there are a number of other opportunities out there. So there's in addition to the incentive program that we have, there's net metering, which really makes it possible for cities and towns to really benefit from what we call distributed generation. So you can put PV on a landfill, which is otherwise not a active use site. And you can generate electricity there, and then the credits that you're getting paid for generating that electricity, you can identify which municipal facilities you want those credits to go to. So you're benefiting a police station, a library, or a school. So there's the incentives, but there's also that continued effort with agencies that work with school districts to really help them navigate and find ways to build projects that will benefit them for generations to come.
Before we leave the MSBA Model School Program is a great example, or perhaps offers a great correlation between that and green energy sources. It may be expensive in the beginning, but over time, as we learn more, as we take out design flaws, as we achieve greater efficiencies in construction, the cost to build the Plymouth School was less last year than it would have been 10 years ago. Substantially less. Much better school than 10 years ago, greater technology than 10 years ago, many environmentally advanced technologies, from the positioning of the building to the types of windows to the heating system to the cooling system. Yet the building costs less than it would have cost to build 10 years ago, because the model school program takes out all the risk and uses all of everything learned on the previous school into the new model. I see the solar industry moving in the same direction, and perhaps that's why our cost per megawatt have dropped so much. And I'm really very excited about our children and our grandchildren in decades ahead when we're not burning so much fossil fuel. You know, I grew up in that business, in the environmental oil pollution business, and have cleaned up oil spills in probably 20 countries, maybe 15 countries, and have seen some horrible environmental blights. We'll never have an environmental blight created by solar energy.
Right.
And think about it. And we'll never run out of sun in our, in our life.
Sure.
And so it's pretty exciting. Next thing I want to talk about, let's bring it from the public sector down to the residential sector.
Great.
If you own a big home and you consume a lot of power, what would your options be for solar power?
Sure, and it's very interesting because we're seeing more and more residents taking advantage of solar. Right now, I would say the majority of residents will enter into what's called a power purchase agreement. In essence, they're leasing their roof to someone else who will own the system, but the resident will benefit from the electricity that's generated from that system and will actually pay less in total than they would have if they stayed on their standard offer with their utility company. And that's called a lease agreement or a power purchase agreement. And that product is available and is being utilized by residents all across the Commonwealth. Some residents may choose right now they want to own their own system, so they want to purchase and own their own system. And that's available, although that is a higher cost option at present. We have decided, the governor has been very clear that he wants to kind of crack the code on residential ownership, really enabling residents to own their own systems. So about 3 months ago, we announced a new initiative, a $30 million solar loan program. We're in design right now. We're going to launch the program this fall. We're talking to local banks and credit unions because we feel it's important to keep as much of those dollars in local lending institutions so that residents that are familiar with and comfortable with their lending institution, like they do with Mass Save on the energy efficiency side,
That's exactly right.
could similarly do the same thing on the solar side. So right now, there's a great initiative out there, and it's called Solarize Mass. And municipalities have to apply to get into that program. But in those communities where they have, what they do is they aggregate roof space. So residents come and they learn, and small businesses, they learn about solar. And then they decide, do I want to actually put solar on my roof? And then if you get a certain number of residents that agree, they aggregate their roof space, and the cost of solar comes down because it's, as with anything, it's an economy of scale and volume. So the municipality would work with the Massachusetts Clean Energy Center and our Green Communities Division on this program. The municipality would select the installer, and depending on how many residents sign up, there's different tiered pricing. So the pricing gets better the more residents that you include. So that's a program that's been ongoing as well. So there are a number of options that are available to residents.
And the residents would sign a power purchase agreement with the utility?
No, it's with the, I mean, they have, the agreement is with the installer.
With the installer.
They would own the system. So there are a number of different companies, residential installers that are out there now. The relationship with the utility is the utility would interconnect the system into the grid, and the utility would still be responsible for the transmission and distribution responsibilities. And so there would be a small bill that would be a basic bill that everybody would pay
for
every
distribution.
month. Yeah.
No, so let me put it in simple terms. If the power unit, the solar power unit, produces more power than the home requires, they're going to get a bill that will have the distribution component to it, which is a small part of the bill. What happens to the surplus power?
So those are credits.
Very simple terms.
Very simple terms. Those are credits that the homeowner can put towards a future energy bill. So that's what happens.
Can they be transferred to other people? Can they be used for other bills?
Well, there's a concept called neighborhood net metering, and I'm not sure how many neighbors have taken advantage of that model yet.
They cannot be used for the district to cover the distribution piece. Right. Mark, we came very close to doing a major omnibus bill on clean energy. I know it was important to you.
Sure.
in the 11th hour, we seem to have run out of time, and we ended up just increasing the cap. Can you talk a bit about that bill? Because I'm certain that it's going to be the first topic of conversation in the next session.
Sure.
Or we're hoping it is.
Right. So the bill that we had worked both with the utility industry as well as the solar community was to really initially address the fact that net metering, which we discussed before, it's currently capped. And the public cap, particularly in one utility territory, but most likely in the two largest, was going to be met. And that meant that municipal projects and others that were defined as public wouldn't be able to take advantage of that very important incentive. So the utility industry and the solar industry both filed different bills to try and get at the root of that issue. And so we played a convening role. We brought both parties together. From the utilities perspective, their concern was about cost. From the renewable energy industry's perspective, they wanted to make sure that we continued to create a robust solar market, to continue to provide opportunities for consumers to take advantage of solar. So we were able, in several weeks' time, with many, many meetings, come up with a bill that would address the net metering issue, would lift the net metering cap, but it would also address the cost issue for utilities.
And when you say cost, you mean of distribution?
So cost, yes, the distribution system.
Yep.
Right. So there was this concept of a minimum bill.
Yep.
So that everyone would be responsible for paying a minimum bill, even if in the instance you used, they had credits.
Right.
Because everyone uses the distribution system. It would also have established as law the governor's 1,600 megawatt goal, which is not only important for the long term, but it sends a very clear message to the industry and the nation as a whole that Massachusetts is very much focused on the clean energy sector.
I think that's a very important piece of the bill.
So there are other nuances to it, and it really was the first time that a state had been able to bring together the utility community and the solar community. In many other states, there's battles going on
And
right
get them
now.
to agree.
And get them to agree. So as you said, it did not pass. The good news is we did at least see an increase in the net metering cap, both on the public and private side, of 2% on the public and 1% on the private side. And it established a task force that has to provide its recommendations, I believe, by March.
That's correct.
Along with, I believe, draft legislation on how to address this issue. So we work very hard, and we do think that a lot of the important work has been done on understanding what the best pathway forward is.
I think it's very important that this be taken up early on in the session, that the hearings happen early on in the session, that we build on the momentum that had been generated by your leadership. And I think it's important to understand that this issue is so complex to those who are not in it every single day. Even as I spoke to my colleagues up on the Hill, everybody supports green energy. Sure. Everybody supports renewable energy sources. The devil is in the detail, and everyone was encouraged knowing that the solar developers and the utilities had both reached this agreement. I think the sooner we can get going on that, we just ran out of time.
Sure.
And it was brought to the floor, unfortunately, by leadership a bit too late to get perhaps if we start earlier, we can get it done earlier. And let's hope the next administration wants to codify it into law the way this administration wants to codify it into law.
Yeah. We are very hopeful of that. I think we've demonstrated that the clean energy focus of this administration, which I think will be a legacy, one of Governor Patrick's big legacies as he leaves office. And I come back to what we said before. It's not only about doing what we can to improve the environment, which should be a primary priority for all of us. It's not just about reducing costs, but that should be a primary objective as well. But it's also about developing economic development opportunities. As you know, Representative, Massachusetts was one of the states to come out of the recession fastest. And there are a number of reasons. There are a number of areas that we've focused strategically on.
This being one of them.
And this being one of them. We've had double-digit growth in each of the last 2 years in the clean energy sector. So, and as the governor always says, and I can appreciate it as a parent, you can, and your listeners can as well, or your viewers, that there's a part of what we do that needs to be very much focused on generational responsibility, making sure that we're not just governing for this generation, but generations to follow, and really focusing on ways that we can be energy independent, really much focused on homegrown energy. The better off those generations that come after us will be.
Well, Mark, I gotta tell you, I often talk about things that go on in Massachusetts that the rest of the country is keenly aware of and proud of, and they look to Massachusetts for its lead. And I often remind some of my constituents that folks outside our borders know more about the greatness of this Commonwealth than we oftentimes appreciate, whether it's in healthcare, whether it's our bond rating, whether it's our balanced budget, the way we treat veterans, the way we educate our children, and the way we take care of our seniors. This is now clearly part of that list. If we can lead the country in the development of clean, renewable energy, like solar, then it's another mark on our legacy. And I thank you for all of the work you've been doing in this regard. The reason you've had the growth trajectory that you've had is that you're a visionary and you know how to bring people together. And that is what makes all the difference in the world. So we've only got a minute left, and I want to thank you for all you've done. I know this is a very unusual time as we come to the end of one administration. You're looking to your future. I have every confidence in the world, Mr. Secretary, that your opportunities will be boundless. Lots of people recognize your leadership, your intellect, and your humanity in the way you deal with people, and I appreciate it a great deal. And to think it all started here in Plymouth.
Yeah, thank you very much. And you're right. I think about Plymouth all the time, and part of my ability to accomplish what I have is really rooted in what I learned in the people that I interacted with in my 11 years experience in Plymouth.
Such a joy to work with those folks. Well, folks, that's it for this episode of Issues of the Day. I thank you for joining us. I hope that you gained some insight into this topic of green and renewable energy. I'd like to thank you, Mr. Secretary, for joining us here today, and every time you come in here, we seem to end up a little bit smarter. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Representative.
Thank you, my friends.